Well, all right. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. I have my buddy here again, Mr. Sir Hanley Liu. All right. And bringing back my friend again. Thanks for being here, by the way. Thanks, man.
Dude, it's always a joy. It's always fun to hang out with you.
Okay. I paid him to say that, guys. So I'll Venmo you your $5 right now. Um, for those of you who have been following kind of the podcast lately, we're talking about something very specific now. I did one with a mutual friend of ours, Wilson Wang, and now I'm talking to Hanley. And we're talking about, let me set up the premise here. We're talking about specifically about Asian culture, Asian American culture. That includes Chinese culture, Korean culture, Vietnamese culture, all the Asian culture, even Indian culture, right? What we're talking about here is something that I've been talking about for a couple of years. You and I have been talking about it for a long time. We had a great conversation on the phone about this. I feel like this is something that not just needs to be addressed, but I just think that there's so much value here. Not just for me, because I remember listening to Wilson. I was like, man, he's bringing up such good points. So I'm learning, but I think this is so much. This brings so much value for maybe some people who are watching. And the premise here is, where does our Asian culture specifically, in terms of its customs, traditions, and values, and family lifestyles, where does that intersect, influence, even interfere with practical Christian living? Of course, there's good ways and bad ways. We're going to talk about both the positive and the ways that I feel like kind of hold this back. And the reason why I think this is so important is because a lot of times, I bring up this example a lot. A lot of times we hear these awesome sermons, these awesome messages. And sometimes I think to myself, I don't know if you ever, if this ever came to your mind, Hanley, but sometimes I think like, man, that message is so awesome, but the application of this message is not quite the same for our culture. It's not quite as easy, or this is just, I don't think this is going to happen in our culture. Or I'm thinking like, man, this sermon's awesome and we agree with it, but I don't know how excited like people at my Korean church, when I used to be at a Korean church, would follow through with this. And when I talk to you and I talk to all my friends, it seems like there's this question or this thought where we feel like that a lot of people, a lot of Asians, they don't even really know why they think or do certain things or not do certain things, which is based upon their own childhood and how they were raised, and especially their culture. So we're trying to unpack all of this here. And so, Hanley, let me just kind of, I mean, what do you think? I mean, have you ever heard a sermon where you felt like that? Like, you heard this awesome sermon from, Piper or J Mac, you were like at T4G or something like that, and you just felt like, gosh, man, that sermon was awesome, and I'm so blessed right now. But have you ever thought like, gosh, I don't know, like, how do I transfer that over into Chinese culture or to Asian culture?
Dude, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think on the topic that we're kind of aiming at, I think it's any type of David Platt sermon or any type of sermon that really challenges Asian American middle class comfort. I think it's hard to translate over, and I can talk about it a little bit about just everything that we were raised and trained up in, and even in light of being part of the church. In terms of growing up in a Christian home. Or a non-Christian home, if you're Asian American second generation or 1.5 generation, I mean, your parents, even if they loved Jesus, they wanted you to succeed in life, right? So your entire life is built on you got to go out there, you got to do well in school, you got to get into a good college, and then you got to find yourself a decent job. And I know that I'm using a stereotype, so not every Asian American comes from such a background, but I think in doing so, having the American dream is so much a part of our, I guess, our upbringing and our identity. And so I would say that's one thing that I would, that I feel like, man, if I bring that back to our church and I tell them something like, would you be willing to sell everything and go on missions? People are going to give you the theological nod, like, amen, that's biblical, but applicationally, I don't think it's going to fly. So those types of sermons. And of course, There's everything we learn in seminary that applies primarily, things that culturally can apply to a majority white church, uh, and it just doesn't apply to a more communal kind of a Eastern culture. So those are a couple things that come to my mind right away.
Yeah, there's two things that came up that you said, like Radical, that book, and Platt. I feel like uh, we hear that stuff, and when that book came out, everyone was like, "Ah, this book is so awesome." And then it frustrated me. I'm like, "Well, are you actually doing what it says? How come we often get so excited about Radical and about some other book or some other ministry, and our culture embraces it. Like, we actually even support it. We're like, this is so awesome. We share about it. But how come oftentimes they emotionally are so into it, but they're not really buying into it as much? What do you think?
I think it's true of me. I think it's true of all of us. We really have to have that gut check of what is the Bible, the New Testament in particular, talk about a kingdom perspective and a kingdom lifestyle. And I think it's something I think about all the time because it's the people I minister to. I minister in an Asian heritage context, and honestly, I'm not saying this as a criticism. And again, this doesn't apply to every Asian American. But for the most part, most Asians that we minister to, Asian Americans, they want a brand of Christianity that will allow them to live the comfortable American lifestyle. Of course, there are the outliers. Of course, there are those who purposely will go into a neighborhood that's more lower income or onto the mission field. They want to purposely, really live out a lifestyle of more suffering or more difficult lifestyle. But for the most part, I think this is true. When someone asked me the question, they're like, okay, Chinese Americans, what kind of church do they need? And I'm like, when you think about Chinese Americans, and I could say maybe Korean Americans too, and other Asian Americans, but for Chinese Americans, you'll find Chinese Americans, integrating into and assimilating into all types of churches, like a Saddleback, right? You'll find an entire Irvine culture of Chinese Americans have no problem going there. Then you'll have some who prefer more theological head knowledge, and you'll find them at MacArthur's church. And there's a lot of them at Grace Church, right? Chinese Americans. Maybe before COVID, there was a lot of them, and you'll find them at Calvary Chapel. You'll find them at like a Korean American church that's Asian American. You'll find Chinese fit in there. You'll find Chinese in charismatic circles and charismatic churches, and then you'll find them in their own Chinese heritage churches. And I think the key there is that whatever theological persuasion you put that out there, you'll have Chinese American Christians. They'll find that church that fits their calling or their theological persuasion. So as long as it doesn't challenge the American dream. And I think this really goes back down to, honor and shame. I mean, a lot of it is built into our hearts. I mean, no matter what, I think we are more communal and we're more familial in the sense where we do want our parents to be honored, and we do want our parents to be proud of us. And like I said, I can say a lot about this. I don't want to just go on and keep going on it, but I think there is some Confucianism that's packed into Asian American Christianity, and when you talk about, that's why you have so many, Asian first generation immigrants that work their tails off and then they send their kids to church or bring their kids to church, and they're like, yeah, Jesus number one, but school number two, but really it's equal, so you can have the parents say, we want you to have Jesus, we want you to have these moral values of church, but we also want you to be excellent and super successful. And the symbol of that would be a certain level of wealth and a certain level of a lifestyle. And so I think for a lot of Asian Americans, if we're honest with ourselves, most average Asian Americans probably don't want to be filthy rich. I mean, well, I take that back. Maybe there's a lot of people who want to be filthy rich, but reasonably, I think most people would say, "Hey, I want a comfort in life that's either better than what my parents had, or at least equal to what my parents had," which is some form of a middle class, a upper middle class lifestyle. I just think that that's something that is so ingrained into our Christianity, that then that's why you see people struggling when their comfort is challenged, especially during COVID.
You know that when you're talking about comfort, that was the second thing that I was gonna say, that I think this belief in comfort and security really is rooted in most of our parents, because they were immigrants. They came over here
Right.
from China and from Vietnam and Korea and things like that. So therefore, they had no friends. They had they had nothing, and so they had to hustle so hard just to make it here and to build up, whether it was wealth or build up, you know, security and shelter and things like that. Therefore, that has been passed down onto us. And so we were raised by playing it safe, yeah, trying to provide a secure lifestyle for yourself. That's why they all want us to get jobs as engineers and doctors and lawyers, because those are secure jobs. You can take care of your family. But unfortunately, what has happened is that because we were raised like that, now we're getting into adulthood. That really is, like, just like you said, a comfort. By the way, that's, across all ethnicities, right? Let's be real. It's not just an Asian thing. But I think
Right.
again,
Right.
this is the whole point. I think for us, though, it's rooted in most of our parents who immigrated here. Therefore, that's been passed down onto us. And now in
Correct.
adulthood, we now have this, like you said, this passion for comfort. Like we don't want to struggle because our parents worked so hard so that we wouldn't have to struggle in our childhood. Therefore, maybe we won't be as radical and things like that. Something I think about is I don't know if this happens at your church, but a lot of times I see a lot of Korean churches who are like on fire for the gospel when it comes to short-term missions, right? They
Absolutely. Yeah.
every summer or December, they go to Mexico and build a house, or they go to India or Brazil or something like that. So on fire. And then they come back to the States, and I'm like, dude, how come you're not still on fire and passionate for the gospel as you were when you were in some other country? Do you think that has to do, not just now we're talking about maybe emotional comfort, like, oh, I have to come back here and kind of risk my personality or risk people looking at me. Do you think that also has to deal with comfort?
I do think it deals with comfort. I mean, I think it's easy to, and it's. I'm not saying it's an unhealthy emotion, but to kind of psych yourself out and say, okay, I'm going to give 2 to 3 weeks or a week, and I'm going to go and I'm going to serve God. I mean, all good intentions. I'm going to go out there and make a difference, but you always know that you're going to come home.
Ah, yeah, that's a good point.
You see, that's I think that's the difference. I mean, what if we said, and am I, as a pastor, if I'm honest, do I feel the calling, right? I can always hide behind that. Like, would I actually take my family, move my family, and this would be like a calling to long-term missions, to somewhere where it's really uncomfortable, and raise my family there. So that's a total different lifestyle. I mean, and to put humor on this, yeah, every single time we went across the border to go to Mexico for those trips, there's always, okay, as soon as we get back across, people want to go to In-N-Out, right? I mean, so it's kind of like, okay, as soon as you get back, and we have to tell people, yeah, for 2 weeks, you're away, but as soon as you come home, you're back to your video games, back to your devices, back to a comfortable lifestyle, if you will. So I think that's part of it.
You bring up something really logical, actually, and this act makes absolute sense. That in the psyche, if your mindset is, hey, this is going to be a short-term trip, so then you're already setting yourself up to like be on fire, and I'm going to go all in for 3 weeks, because that's really what it is. So logically, it actually makes perfect sense, and actually, yeah, I mean, any project is kind of like that. You just kind of go all in. I think what something I always I've noticed, and I've said this before, is I wish that a lot of these short-term mission programs would come back, and now that all logically makes sense. But then they come back, and then what they hopefully should try to do is take all of that and now reapply it. But now, how are you going to do that here? You're not going to obviously go out into the middle of the campus and start doing like some skit, from YWAM. but then
Right.
see, those are the things that I think are important to understand. Like, okay, now that you're here back in the States, how are you going to continue to be on fire? But it looks different from this 3 week all out kind of on fire
Right.
trip.
Right. Right.
And I wish I would see that more because yeah, the comforts is a little bit different, and you are going to come back home. So how do we carry those principles back over to the states? Do you think in our culture that there are specific things other than just the comforts of the world that really hold us back, kind of interfere with certain biblical application or practices?
You're talking about general culture or just Asian American,
Asian
more
culture,
specifically?
Asian culture.
Yeah, I think that this would apply beyond Asian American culture, but I do think again, honor and shame is really built into us, and I think reaching a level of success, you don't want to disturb that success. So, for example, I'll give you two examples. One is that, I this is true of me. I'll go to another city, or when I took the youth on short-term missions, like I'll go, ringing the doorbell, no problem, sharing the gospel because I don't have to live with these people. I don't have to face these aren't my real actual neighbors, everyday neighbors, but when you come back into your community, there's relationships that are built. And do you have the courage, or do you feel like it's right to be so vocal about the gospel, right? Or to do something as active for Christ? And then let's talk about the workplace. I mean, beyond the fact that there's certain things that you just can't say in the workplace about Christ or the gospel, in the secular workplace. I mean, but are we as courageous, especially now with cancel culture and Christianity and conservative thought not being cool and acceptable? Are we willing to have those conversations if it may disturb how our work place environment, the people see us, or whether or not our job is on the line? And obviously, those are wisdom issues, right? I mean, that I don't think that's a black and white issue. That's a wisdom issue of how vocal and how missional you should be in your workplace to kind of be a disruptive witness, if you will. So I think that's the difference. And I do see that there's other cultures where there's more individualism, where it's like, okay, I don't really care what people think. If I want to say something, even in my workplace, I'm willing to lose my job over that. I'm willing to change jobs over it. I'm willing to be an entrepreneur. Um, and start my own business. But I think in Asian culture there is a little bit of, hey, my parents worked so hard for this, like we've talked about. I've made it, and now I'm comfortable in this really reputable company, or I'm comfortable in this field, and my colleagues respect me. I want to maintain that level of success, of comfort, of socioeconomic status, of my reputation. And so I think, because if that goes wrong, I got to come back. I got to face my parents. I got to face my family and all that. So I think there is some distinction maybe for Asian Americans.
See, this is what I'm talking about. I think when you're talking about honor shame culture, this is one of the things that I think is necessary to unpack so that members of your church, members of other Asian churches can understand how this honor shame culture really does influence them and how they practice certain things. So let me ask you a question. Do you think even into adulthood, past college, do you think that there's still something inside Asians where they're like, okay, even as small as, man, if I evangelize right now, man, my rep in this company might go down. Do you think that there's still deep down inside of them, they're thinking like, oh man, my parents are going to be so disappointed in me? Do you think that still happens?
Dude, I think it's so there. I mean, what I mean, it doesn't matter if you came from a poor family, a rich family, middle class family. I mean, what Asian American kid doesn't secretly, even the rebel who says, I hate my parents, like, what Asian American kid wouldn't want their parents to say, I'm proud of you, right? Especially in immigrant cultures where parents aren't expressive in terms of hugs and I love you and I'm proud of you, son. And oh, here's the here's your participation trophy, or a C is good as long as you tried your best. I mean, you're not going to get that, you know. And so for the most part, I think it matters. I think it matters. And yeah, I think that that's why what we experience. I mean, as we get older and we have the opportunity to minister to older men, why is it that there's some men who, they're Christian, they're actually very successful, they're solid believers actually, they don't really have an unreconciled relationship with their father. It's decent, it's okay. Their father's a Christian, but then their father passes away, and then they have this emotional crisis. And so I would understand where if they're unreconciled with their father, there's a lot of pain. But you see these men, they're still, I guess, because their fathers haven't ever told them, son, I'm really, really proud of you. I love you, and their fathers pass away and they feel this sense of loss because I think that we as Asian American men, we need that affirmation, right? We need someone. So we're going to find that somewhere. So whether it's going to school and learning at a very young age that an A plus brings you affirmation in some way, or going into a company and the boss says, well done, good and faithful servant, in that sense, and then getting the promotion, or even your senior pastor telling you as a young intern or something, hey, I'm proud of you, and getting that affirmation. And then eventually, we become, we ascend and, and I think that builds us up. It gives us a reputation. That's all built into honor, shame. Are we bringing honor to our family, to our parents? Are we bringing shame? And what does that look like in society? I think we carry that as part of us. Yeah.
Man, what you said was so golden right there. I think that, and this might be old, but just when you said that, what I was thinking about was, yeah, with our parents, or most of our parents, again, not everyone, but the typical Asian family, the way we received affirmation and love from our parents was through success, dude. That is
Hmm.
crazy. That when you said that, I was like, so it makes total sense that even after we leave the home, we are still trying to find affirmation through success from our bosses and from our work. And that is so valuable that to risk that for the sake of the gospel is incredibly hard.
It's a different missional lifestyle if you think about the mission of the American dream. I mean, especially if your parents you grew up in a home where you're speaking another language, right? An Asian language. I mean, you're going out into your school and maybe you're surrounded by Asians depending where you live, but you're on mission. You go out there, it's a different culture, and you're really, and forgive me for saying this, but I don't mean this in any racial way or anything, but you're entering the white man's world, right? So even if you consider ministry like the model of success that was given to us, and I'm not saying it's bad, was, and you're in, Saddleback, right? That's like a great, successful church, but the model of success would be to ascend to the top of white evangelicalism, right? That would be the definition of success. So you
Right.
can think of corporate America,
Right.
corporate America, and being an Asian American. You're always See, so when you're Asian and when you're sitting in a circle of non-Asians, you're always thinking, how should I present myself? What do I say? Because you've been taught like a model of success, and so if you're depending on it may not be white, it may be black, it may be another ethnicity, but you're always told, okay, you're Asian, you're different. So when you're out there, you need to say the things that are going to convey whatever is defined as successful, right? That's going to speak into the ears of these white or black or non-Asians are looking at you and they expect you to act a certain way, or maybe they just expect you to be yourself, but you're telling yourself, I need to be what the definition and standard of success is. I think that begins as soon as you leave home and go to school. Now, if you're third generation, fourth generation Asian American, maybe you're a lot more integrated. But I would say for us that was my experience, and I remember going to elementary school where I was I was in a community where I was one of two Asian Americans in my elementary school. So everyone's like, hey, what are you eating for lunch? Ching Chong Hua, is your dad Bruce Lee? I mean, this is in the 80s, right? And so I always had to define myself, and actually it worked out. Nobody wanted to fight me because they thought my dad was Bruce Lee, and obviously there's bullying and all that. But then I moved into a neighborhood that was predominantly Asian American. And I think the perspective changed, but still, there's that perception, especially if you play sports or you enter into a place where, there's less Asian Americans. So if you play sports and you're on the sports team, there's always that stigma. What do they think of me as the Asian guy? Or is the one or two or three Asian guys on the team, something like that.
I
Yeah.
know honor shame is the main kind of core of what we're trying to unpack, but I think again, man, just some of the stuff you said is exactly what I'm talking about. We need to unpack some of the real specifics of how honor shame actually affects us and influences us. I say this a lot. I say, like, sometimes I hate how Korean I am. I mean, like, I love my culture and everything, but I hate how Korean I am, because what I mean is, like, sometimes I'll be in a meeting and, like, I don't want to speak up, because in my head I'm like, oh, don't disrespect someone, or don't say anything unless someone's called upon you, or, like,
Right, right.
I hate how Asian I am, that sometimes I'll be talking to, even some of our Talbot professors, or, like, people who are way more seasoned in life, people that we respect, and I'm just like, man, am I allowed to disagree with this guy? Don't say it. Don't disrespect with this guy. He's an authority figure, and I just hate that, how it holds me back so much. But man, just all this affirmation that we're talking about, I think, wow, I think we unpacked something huge here, and I think that does carry over into continuing to seek that affirmation from bosses and stuff like that. Something that you said, I think I agree with as well, and I want to know some of your further thoughts about this. Is the Christian marketplace, and I think, again, this really does tie into this whole honor shame affirmation thing. I think growing up, I mean, I grew up like this, like John Piper, John MacArthur, John Owens, and John Shin. Dude, I wanted to be like just like them, and I wanted to preach like them. Obviously, the big church was, an easy thing to kind of equal to being something like a successful pastor, right? But again, in our culture, success is so prioritized. Therefore, again, we grew up in the 80s. Bruce Lee, other than him, we didn't really have a lot of people to look up to in terms of, like, celebrities. Therefore, who do we look up to even in the Christian world? We're looking up to a lot of these white dudes, who are well-known authors. But I think here's something that I wanted to ask you about is, I feel like it's causing a lot of Asians to seek after something that, well, number one, they're not like them, but number two, that they truly think that is the model of success, and their model is completely wrong. And then, therefore, what they do is they continue to go after these guys. I mean, I have all their books too, but they continue to go after these guys as if, like, they are the standard, like, dude, he is the standard, and I need to try to be just like him, and agree with everything that he says, because they are successful and they are authority figures. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be able to dissect and discern with wisdom what's an acceptable standard, and then whether or not we have to meet that standard, right? And I think when you think about it, I'm totally okay with reading books. You go to a conservative seminary in America, and you're probably going to read books and commentaries and textbooks, and written by white or non-Asian professors, and that's what we were raised up on. So that becomes a standard. You're taught these are the people that you study, these are the people that you read. And if you go into popular evangelicalism, and if you're in an English speaking context, then that's what you have. You either have black or white examples of English speaking or American culture. Now those are vastly different, but those are your examples, depending on your persuasion or how you're led theologically. So I mean, I think it's okay to say, okay, I'm in America. This is American evangelicalism, and this is the stuff, and I'm going to an English-speaking white or black or an American seminary. This is what's there. But I think where we need to be able to distinguish that is, okay, I can't take some of this and just implant it back onto my Asian culture or my Asian heritage church, or I can't take this and throw this back onto my parents, right? That's the difference. And I think as long as we understand that we can learn from certain things that we learn in society because we're in America, we need to remember that we are Asian American, and God, by His sovereign ordinance, He's the one that designed us this way. He's the one that decided these are going to be your parents, and this is the culture that you're gonna grow up with. You're gonna be growing up eating rice and being a little bit bilingual or whatever it is, right? And so I don't think we need to apologize for that. I think we need to see, well, what is God's purpose then? He's put us as, I guess, sojourners. He put us as foreigners, but yet we can adapt. We can go into the culture. So I think we just take the best of both worlds, and we become ourselves. So if you ask me my identity, I would actually say that I am more American than I am Chinese, right? And because of I'm cultured more American in many ways. But at the same time, I have to remember that who I am because of how my parents raised me and the church that I grew up with. I'm very much Chinese, and so how do you that? How do you discern, how to be who you are in Christ, as Christ has designed you to be? So I think that's how I would see it. I know there is a lot of discussion right now where people are saying, let's throw away all of that, I guess, quote unquote whiteness or white evangelicalism, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying let's be
Right.
real. You go to seminary in America, like you could have went to seminary in Asia if you wanted to, but we didn't. So I'm not saying let's throw that away. I'm just saying let's read that and contextualize it. There's the term, you know.
Yeah, I think I should clarify. I agree with what you're saying. In terms of content and looking up to them to see like what they have done in their life and we learn from that, absolutely. And like of course in seminary these are the guys who are writing all their books, and so of course we trust them, and we continue to seek kind of their books and stuff because these are their skill sets. They study this stuff for much longer than we have. So I agree with that. I think what I was trying to say, and this might clarify, is that as Asians we have such a it's been ingrained into us to be successful, and therefore we're always comparing ourselves to these big
Yeah.
names, or even like large churches, pastors who have large churches.
Right. Right.
And I
Right.
think what's really dangerous about that is that we're gonna always like kind of live our life running after things for the wrong reasons, and struggling, like continuing to struggle with like this idea that that's the standard that I need to achieve. And so I think it's just something that I feel like the Christian marketplace and with our culture, it provides a lot of good content, and at the same time, there's something happening inside of us that we need to also keep in check.
Yeah, okay. I hear what you're saying. Maybe this is, I didn't think about this before, so this is still processed, but maybe I can say that there's that communal nature. Asians are more communal and less individualistic. Generally, we're more communal people. Maybe that when you translate that into the secular marketplace or the Christian evangelical marketplace, so either one, that we do want to be accepted communally. So in America, if this is what is commonly accepted as successful, maybe we're more inclined to say, okay, well, that's success. So if I wasn't a pastor, if I wasn't in ministry, if I wasn't talking about the church, if I went into the medical field, entertainment business, whatever it is, legal field, I would want to ascend into these fields. These are the leaders, these are the people, and that's what it means to be successful. And I need to ascend. I need to pass that. And I think it's the same thing, maybe. That when you go to seminary and everything that you're learning, this is success, this is the model. Then how close can I get to that model? I think. So then that's what the Pipers and the MacArthurs would represent for maybe the young reformed Asian Americans, right? That is who we see as those are the people we read their books and it moves us. And we haven't read too many Asian American titles or authors who are espousing this type of conservative or reformed or gospel centered or whatever it is theology. And so that's what I need to be, you know. And so maybe, yeah, maybe if that's what you're saying, I do think it's true. Um, and I think again, it's having a balance, right? But I do think it can get to the point where if we're now going into the Asian American church or Asian heritage church and trying to just be that person, it may not minister as well. It may not be contextualized or communicate well to our people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you're making that illustration analogy, that's a great one. So it does make sense in our world or in our field of industry, if you want to call it. Yeah, those are the people that are on top. So that, you want church to go after them. But it's kind of funny because we hear this all the time. Like we hear this, it's not about how big your church is, and it's not about how many people know you. And everyone's like, yeah, 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 yeah. And but the question is like yes and no. The question is yes and no. It's yes based upon making sure your head doesn't get too big, and we're not trying to be the most popular person. But the answer is also no, because of what you said. I mean, these guys are doing very well, so we can learn a lot from them. So the dynamic is really hard. The dynamic is really hard to know, like, how much of that am I supposed to hold on to? I think, again, I probably didn't explain this well, but again, I think in our culture, though, what's really difficult is that we have this, it's been ingrained into us to be successful. And I think are, we don't know how to utilize our own wheelhouse
Mm,
because no one has ever taught that
yeah,
to us.
yeah,
Therefore, we do, going back to my point, which was the answer is also no, because I mean these guys are on top. Therefore, we got to be just like them. I mean, like how many of us, how many friends do we have that we know that preaches just like another guy because he's
right,
really well
right.
known, right? Or agrees everything with this one author because that's like their hero. And but we don't know, we've never been trained how to not only use our own wheelhouse, but how to be satisfied with using our own wheelhouse and having a church of like 150 people, and how to be satisfied with that.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it is, and to continue to bring it back to the Asian Americanness of it, I think it is looking for the affirmation. I
Yeah.
think it is looking for the affirmation, right? These are the people who are affirmed. These are the people that we affirm. Therefore, if we preach like them, lead like them, lead our people this way, our people affirm them as well, then we will be affirmed not just by our own Asian community, but by the general evangelical community as a whole. And I think it goes back to that versus, and again, these are stereotypes. Whereas if you're purely from a Western upbringing, then you're much more individualistic. You're much more confident to say, well, I'm just going to go out there and figure out what I want to do, and I'm going to go after it, and I'm going to go get it. Because maybe my parents have taught me that from a very young age, that you go and success means you find your dream and you go do it. Most of our parents did not tell us that. Most of our parents did not say, "Hey, what are you good at?" You know, and what do you want to do? Now I'm talking about first generation parents. I think they came and said, "Okay, you can do these things, but you need to reach this goal. You want to own a home, you want to, be able to have, certain symbol of success, maybe a certain vehicle or just a lifestyle, where you can, raise your kids in a certain community and afford to send them to college. I mean, all of these are symbols that you've kind of made it. So I think for an Asian American, what would it mean to our parents? And what would it mean to us for us to say, I've made it, right? And I think we go back to the symbols and we go back to a certain, how we live. And I think that's where it goes back to the comfort. But anyway, I'm tracing back, but I think it is the affirmation. If our entire lives were, we need affirmation from our parents by hitting certain marks, then we're trained to go into, I guess, seminary or into our careers and say, well, who are the people who make that mark? What is the symbol of success? And for me, so let me just give you some examples. I think we would agree with, for the longest time, the symbol of expository preaching, if that's what you aspire to be, would be John MacArthur, for example, right? I mean, we would look to him and be like, yeah, that's the symbol. But MacArthur, that's only one way to do expository preaching. But for us, because of our persuasion, we're like, okay, that's the symbol. What's the symbol of great urban ministry? Tim Keller, he is the symbol. And then you have your Asian Americans, like Francis Chan, but he's kind of real missional and all over the place, right? So I mean, so he's not comfortable. So I think naturally we're gonna be like, hey, maybe I align more with John Piper or MacArthur than I am with Francis Chan, who keeps moving, you know. right? So I mean, I think that's revealing as well.
Man, I remember growing up. What am I saying? Growing up, I remember when I first was in my beginning pastoral years of ministry. Man, I tried to preach like J Mac so bad. Like I tried to preach just like him. I was like, man, this guy's the man. I got to preach just like him. So I did verse by verse and like preaching on one verse for like 15 minutes. I did it all, man. So I totally followed that. I asked you this question when we last talked on the phone, and I asked you like what about you, like in your heart, in your kind of experience, what are some areas that you have observed or things that you're kind of passionate about when it comes to, yeah, where do you think our culture kind of intersects and influences our biblical application? Are there like things that you see or things that you've grown up on that you felt like, gosh, this is like always happening? Are there points that you thought of?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is what I shared. I realize at the end of the day, if I do serious spiritual reflection, that I want my mom to be proud of me. I want my mom to be proud of me. And I didn't know that that was impacting me even long into ministry, where why, am I so driven to want to do well? Why do I get upset at myself if I, let's say seminary, I get a grade, that's not like I get a B instead of an A or something. And dude, you're in seminary, you're trying to learn how to minister to people. And so what, you didn't do as well on like the hardest exegesis exam. Like, why are you angry? Why are you upset? It's like, it's not like your mom's even going to care. But I think, I want my mom to be proud of me because I wasn't a good student, in junior high and high school. I messed around, and I saw the pain on my mom's heart. I come during that time, my mom raised three of us, a single mom. So that's why it's like, hey man, I want my mom to be proud of me. um, I didn't have that father figure in my life, most of my life. So it always was important for me to have the senior pastor or a supervising pastor tell me, hey, good job. That was a good sermon, or you led well. And sometimes, that would put me into a place where, yeah, I was a really good person in terms of, I guess, obedience to my elders. But what if I disagreed, and what if I needed to gently and lovingly challenge them? And I figured that out. So I'm always so those are some things that I'm always thinking that I had to get over at a certain point and be confident. So I was always apologizing for being too young, and never really content or satisfied with any of my ministry experience, performance, just always wanting to do better. And I realized, why do I have a chip on my shoulder? And it's because my mom's already proud of me. She's fine, but I'm riding off of the fact that I didn't go to one of the best colleges, and I wasn't that AP, student in in I guess high school. And I saw all the tears and the pain I brought to my mom. So that's real with me, and being an Asian American, I saw all of my friends succeed academically around me, uh, and how their parents were so proud and everything. So I mean, I think that matters to me, even if I understand theologically that doesn't matter as much to God. I think the other thing, and we kind of alluded to this, is every single time I saw myself in a circle, like pastors' meetings, where I'm surrounded by non-Asians. There was a period of time where I would always apologize or make a joke, for being Asian. I'd always make apologize, like, oh yeah, I'm the Asian guy, or kind of. And I don't know why. I don't know why I would do that. I stopped doing that. Um, yeah, and I knew that, and this is another thing, is that when I'm in an Asian culture, I think you've experienced this, leadership wise, when you're in an Asian heritage church, you never want to disagree with the elder or the senior pastor or your superior or someone older than you. And if you disagree with them in a meeting, even if everybody agrees with you that your point is right, they will the fact that you publicly disagreed with your superior. But now, when I'm talking with white pastors or black pastors, like, I have to disagree. are counting on me to speak up and say something, actually they would respect my opinion as long as I'm being very respectful about it. But for the longest period of time, I would, like you kind of mentioned, I would not say anything. I'd just be like, well, I'm not going to disrespect that person's opinion or something like that. And so I think those are kind of the differences, that my Asianness really shapes my leadership, maybe my fear of taking risks at times, of shaking up the, rocking the boat. And at the end of the day, it goes back down to my parents, and I think a lot of us have to realize that sometimes.
You know, I've done that too, where I'm with like a bunch of non-Asians, and I make this joke about myself and my culture, and I think I know why we do that. I feel like we did that because that was kind of like our only in to be a part of that group. It was like, okay, these guys are all older than me, or they're all like successful, so I'm a nobody. So I'm gonna have to ridicule myself so I could get in with these guys and make them laugh. And it's also like
Mm,
to affirm that I want to make sure that I communicated to them that you are all superior to me and I am beneath you, you know? So
mm.
I feel like that's why we always did that. I used to do that all the time too. I would always make a joke about myself or about my family, and make everyone laugh, and just be like, okay, I got them to laugh. Maybe they accepted me, you know? Um,
Right, right, right.
Gosh, there's just so much just in that one, just experience right there. There's so much in that, man, you know?
Yeah.
That's what we did. You know, thank you for being vulnerable, by the way. Man, you shared a lot of vulnerable things right there. And I think deep down inside of me, I also am like that too. Like, even as a 39-year-old, I want my parents to approve of me, and be like, I'm proud of my son. Um, do you think what this might be the same answer, but in your experience in pastoral ministry, as you have been ministering to different students and adults, what's one thing that you have noticed just in the people that you have been ministering to that also kind of you feel like is a kind of an obstacle in their life because of their Asian culture in terms of following through with the Bible? Or do you think it's the same? Is it the same obstacle? Like, everyone is trying to seek approval from their parents that's really holding them back?
Well, that's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, I think that, seeking approval from your parents, I think that would be more of dealing with the immigrant parents. So if you have immigrant parents, if I'm ministering to people, whether they're young adults, or more young adults, or people with parents or immigrant parents, but when I'm dealing with younger people whose parents are like us that grew up here, and there's less of that, and I think it's more uh, being accepted by the popular culture,
Yeah.
so yeah, right. So whatever's going on in your social media feed, and societal pressures, I would say that's a greater issue than so I think it depends. I think it depends generationally. Yeah.
If there was some sort of gathering where we were addressing Asian American culture and how that influences our understanding of Scripture and even following through with it, and there was one thing that you could address and preach about, and you shared a lot of good stuff, man, during this podcast, a lot of good stuff. But if you
Sorry, man. I didn't answer all your
No,
questions.
you did, man. Stop saying sorry. Come on, man. That's Asian
Oh
culture.
yeah, that's
We
right.
say sorry too much. um, if there was one thing that you can address, one thing you can preach about, if we had like a gathering, what would be one thing?
Regarding Asian American culture, I would preach on identity in Christ. That's a very broad topic. I'm not really sure how I would approach it, but I would definitely talk about finding our identity, our personal purpose in who Christ has called us to be. He's given us all a calling. He's given us all race, ethnicity, a station in life, whether we're American, Canadian, in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, wherever it is. Asians are everywhere. He's given us that platform, and he's given us spiritual gifts and natural skills. So how do we look at everything that God has given us, even our hurts, even our pains? It's for a purpose, so that we can be used for His kingdom, and that's what I would preach on. Maybe a topical sermon.
No, that's
Yeah.
great. Identity in Christ versus like real life struggles, like identity in parental approval or in success, or identity in just trying to do well in school. So I think that's super powerful, and I think that's something that again, I think needs to get unpacked specifically for our culture. For our culture. And so, hey, man, I just want to say thanks for dropping some good knowledge here. And seriously, there's things that you said here. I was like, man, I mean, it just proves how dumb I am, man. I'm like, dude, this is like stuff. This is awesome. Maybe it's old stuff, but man, there are some things you said with the honor shame thing that I was like, oh man, it kind of blew me away. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And
No, I appreciate you. You're helping me process these things. That's why these thoughts aren't coming out like crisp bullet points. Because as you're asking me questions, I'm like, wait a minute, that's true, or "Ah, man, I never thought of it this way." So I appreciate it. I'm learning.
and this is why this is fun for me. I get to learn from my friends, and I think, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there are people out there, other Asians out there, who maybe have never thought about this or can find a real value in this. Like, because I think people, they really don't know why they can't do certain things. Like, why doesn't it come as easy for them? And I think a lot of it is based in our ownership culture, which is connected to our parents, and then of course, which is connected to this whole idea of like risking our comforts and affirmations, stuff like that. So this is really valuable stuff, and thanks for sharing, man.
Yeah, of course.
I ain't really changed like I thought I would. It's like another day in the good. Laid back sipping, sun rays on the pad. Ain't no worries when you're winning, ain't no way to be mad. Cookout vibe, got the whole fam present. Life is a blessing, thankful for every second. Best foot forward, I'm two-stepping. Best kept secret, I'm two weapons.